Welcome, everyone, to another fantastic episode of Double Book. Tonight's guest is the literary equivalent of slipping on a banana peel only to accidentally overthrow a kingdom. He's the twisted mind behind Jester, a hilarious and heartfelt fantasy romp starring a goblin with more grit than most paladins and a latrine to legend arc that belongs in the history books. His words are sharp, his satire sharper, and his fan base is somewhere between cackling and crying. Please welcome the Jester King himself, the brilliant, the bold, the absolute beast, Tim Carter. How you doing today, Tim?
I'm doing very well, thanks. Thanks for having me on. I'm really happy to be here.
Me too, man. I am so happy that the universe allowed this to happen.
Absolutely. Finally.
I know. So, anyone that's not aware, this is our third attempt to do a live. We had just Mother Nature on both sides of the world decide to go through like, nah, we're not having it today. No, we're not having it. So we finally were able to go through and have you on the channel. I've been looking forward to this conversation for a very long time.
Me too.
So we have a friend that jumped in, the fantastic Tim McKay. How's it going, Tim? Exactly. Knock on wood.
Yeah,
so right here, I knocked on. I've been. Got to be safe. Mother Nature's like, you thought you were funny. It's going to shut off the power. So. Oh man. So. Oh man. Tim, to be very honest with you, I went through and read The Jester and truly loved it. It was so much fun. It was a breath of fresh air. For those not familiar with your work, do you mind going through and giving everyone just a quick elevator pitch for The Jester?
Sure. So Jester is my second book, but first novel. So I wrote a novella before it called Major Domo. And the sort of, they take place in the same world with recurrent themes, but they're not, the characters don't overlap, but the characters are always underdogs that are sort of the classic lowest level creatures within your traditional fantasy world. So the hero of Major Domo was a kobold with a club foot who couldn't even run away. The hero of Jester is a goblin latrine slave named Shelley, who has been sort of captured and taken to this very poorly run castle where he is sort of trapped in the basement cleaning the toilets. And his sort of core inciting incident is he hears rumors that this sort of unbeatable undead army is on the march, and that the castle he's captured in is in the sort of crosshairs, but the rulers are too stupid, too corrupt, too greedy to organize any kind of semblance of a defense. And so this inspires him to set out on a journey to save Castle Halfsock from itself. And along the way, of course, it's really about his journey of overcoming his self-doubt and his lack of confidence, which comes from having been bashed on the head and carted away to clean other people's toilets, and sort of become the best version of himself.
Awesome. We have someone who I've not talked to in a very long time. Ted, how are you doing, buddy? I'm so happy you're here. Like, I'm giddy to see your name popped up. I'm so happy. I hope you're doing well, my friend. So, Tim, what got you into storytelling? Because honestly, this does not feel like your first novel, to be very honest with you. It feels like a second, third, even fifth novel. It's so well written. So what got you into storytelling?
Well, first of all, thanks so much. That's the kind of compliment that really lands for anyone writing. So I really appreciate that. So I have 25 odd years as a professional writer and producer in some form of the entertainment industry. So I started in film. I've written a whole boatload of screenplays, and we can some of that there's almost like a finishing of the circle story that I think is going to happen there. But I wrote, I've written 3 produced movies and produced 5 that, actually made it out of the Hollywood system, which, is a halfway decent batting average. And then somewhere along the way, it really started during the writer's strike in 2008, when there was literally no work for writers, and I had movies dropped out of like big networks and out of the big Hollywood studios. I kind of transitioned just purely for survival's sake into writing for video games as well. I'm a long time gamer. I love tabletop games. I like role playing games. Been playing them since I was a kid, and I had to come back to Vancouver because there was no work in LA, and the gaming industry was thriving in Vancouver, and so one thing led to another, and so I've written on. I mean, writers are never the sort of sole driving force in a video game, but I've worked on maybe 15 major titles, and I have kind of lead writing credits on 2 or 3 pretty big ones. The most notable of which is probably Sleeping Dogs, which was a big open world crime game from maybe a decade ago. So I wrote pretty much all of that game, the story and characters in it. And so I've always, I have a lot of experience writing things, but my first love obviously was books, if only because back in the day, there were no video games when I was a kid. And that says something about my age. But and so I noodled around writing short stories and sort of when I had spare time or a little downtime. And I finally, a couple of years ago, just went, it's sort of now or never if this is the thing I want to do. And so I knuckled down and powered through the novella to see if I could do it and to see whether people would like what I wrote. And then immediately, I felt, before it even came out, I felt good about having done what I wanted to do with it. Like I didn't know if anyone else would like it, but so then I just started in Jester. I had been kicking the idea around for ages and never really sort of sat down and just went, okay, I'm going to try to finish a draft. So it comes at the long end of writing other things and thinking about how characters talk and the things I like. And then I think the other half of it is really, it comes out of playing Dungeons and Dragons a lot, and which my D&D playing went way up during COVID because of course everyone's sitting at home with nothing else to do, right? And my friend circle discovered Roll20 and the other ways that you could play online. So it's perfect for lockdown. And so I was playing a lot and just thinking about, man, I my murder hobo buddies are kind of psychopath. Like if they were in the real world, they would be in jail. And the people I really have sympathy for are the poor kind of cannon fodder characters that are just kind of being fed in to be murdered by paladins and things. And so that started my brain going about, like what were these people's inner lives like, and just it kind of rolled from there.
So I do have some follow-up questions, but I am shocked that you wrote Sleeping Dogs. I loved that game. I'm not trying to blow smoke. I swear I'm not trying to blow smoke. You said Sleeping Dogs. Like, there's no way this is the same game that I played in 2012. And I just Googled it. I was like, this is the game. I loved that game. That game was so much fun. It was during the big hype of the Grand Theft Auto before the big game, whatever the newest one that came out. But this was during that time, and I liked this game more than I think it was Vice City that was out from a Grand Theft Auto. Like Sleeping Dogs, I felt was done so much better. It just didn't get that big of a hype like the Grand Theft Auto, which I thought it deserved. It was so well written, such a fun game, and that's crazy. You went through and you were the primary writer for that, so I'm like super shocked, super giddy now. Yeah, just huge props. Love that game.
Oh, thanks. It was a ton of fun to work on. It was a complete sort of it's one of those jobs that it was sort of a train wreck, right? Because it had been canceled by Activision, then it got rebooted by Square Enix. I was friends with the people making it, and I had tried to help them I'd worked on some of their other games. I tried to help them find a Hong Kong writer that would obviously fit. For people who don't know, the game is set in Hong Kong and is about a cop going undercover in the Triad. So there's both a Hong Kong movie authenticity you want to get because it's very influenced by the movies of the day, and then also just the authenticity of the place. And then they couldn't find anyone, and at the last minute they're like, look, we just need somebody, can you please come and work on this? And the whole thing was done at a dead sprint. Half the things in there my producers didn't know I was doing because there just was no time for, like, normally those things are very bureaucratic and everything you do gets approved by 7 levels of people. But it was such a rush. They were such a budget crunch that, I pretty much rewrote the entire game and invented whole characters and things. And I was just like, well, when they do the playthroughs, because the senior people always play it to see, they'll see what I'm doing. But so it's a lot of fun.
Man, that's awesome. Yes, Tim, I am in a presence of one of the greats.
Thanks, Tim.
I am super hyped. That's so cool, man. That's so cool. Like I was, I remember playing this. Like I remember when it came out and the gameplay. Yeah. Anyway, this is not talk about the video game stuff. That's so cool. That's so cool. You said movies as well. What kind of movies were you writing on?
Well, so I've done. So the ones that are most notable, I produced but did not write a digital series actually for Warner Brothers called Mortal Kombat Legacy, which came out of actually more or less the same time as Sleeping Dogs, even though obviously you produce one and go to the other. Mm-hmm. I think I went right off the set for Mortal Kombat into Sleeping Dogs, if I remember right. And then I wrote 2 movie adaptations for Dead Rising that we did with Legendary Pictures and Sony. Mm-hmm. It's a whole long tale of woe. They ended up on Sony's streaming channel, which is not where they were supposed to be. But, so 2 sort of modestly budgeted zombie movies. I wrote a romantic comedy for Stars, which I also produced. And then I produced a number of TV pilots. And then I was paid to write, but they were never made. Probably 20 scripts, some of which, like to my mind, some of the best stuff I ever did never got made. And a lot of it was video game adaptation. That was sort of because I was well known as a writer of video games after Sleeping Dogs, that was a sort of like, I'm the crossover guy. So if you wanted to make an adaptation, and this is long before sort of Fallout or Last of Us really blew up the game adaptation kind of side of things, I was sort of one of your go-to guys. So I tried for ages to get a TV series of XCOM off the ground. It got very close and never went. Alan Wake, we had one. So that was all set up at AMC, and then it never went to camera. So a whole host of projects over the years. Some of which I now think I was meeting with a friend of mine who's quite a successful author the other day, and he's like, "You must have a pile of scripts somewhere." And I'm like, "Yeah, I got a whole bunch of horror movies." And he's like, "Well, if you own them, you should turn them into books." So that's one thing of the future is going to be a whole series of kind of in the tone of Jester. So heartfelt but ridiculous horror movies, zombies, vampires, things of that nature.
That is too cool. Too cool. So let's jump back into Jester. I am curious, what was that original spark for Jester? Did the story begin with Shelley, or was it a question that you were going through and thinking, what came together with this story? What was the starting point?
It started as a short story about a god. So Shelley was really the beginning of it, and without me knowing, because I was very inexperienced in writing fiction, but I was dabbling with short stories because you could finish them, right? Like I could take a weekend and finish a short story, where a novel was like almost like even thinking about finishing it seemed impossible. But I wanted to do something about this guy who was like the lowliest of the low, and then he got sort of sucked into castle politics. But the original story was just about him solving the murder, which is at the very beginning of the book. It wasn't about the rest of the grand sort of conspiracy and the bigger meta picture. I kind of, when I decided to expand it, it was because I loved his voice and his sort of combination of insecurity but also intelligence. And I just thought, well, okay, it's got to be a longer, like he's wrapped up the murder, so that can't be the story. But that's a good launch point for a bigger mystery or a bigger kind of narrative arc. So it really started with him, and then I chose to go with that one because I really liked his voice.
So Ted has a question for you. What did you do to develop the character as Shelley, really giving Shelley their own voice?
Well, I think, this comes out of video games, it comes out of movies, is you try to construct someone from the beginning that is already interesting. So, okay, he's a goblin. Well, I love D&D, and in D&D, goblins are almost always just the lowliest of the low. Like people murder them for no reason, right? And and it's completely fine, right? Like it's socially acceptable to basically commit genocide against goblins. Nobody cares. And they're usually so powerless that they haven't actually caused much trouble. So I started with that idea that, you know, my guy had actually been bashed on the head by the kind of people I play D&D with. So I'm having fun with my friends, essentially. And then I just sort of tried to get in his head and think like, okay, how would he feel about this, right? And then that gave him a voice that I found really sort of sympathetic and fun. And then I went and sort of, okay, well, where is he? Why? What is he investigating? You know, like what's the sort of meta story? But it really started with, I'm going to pick this character. And I think I had a bit of a chip on my shoulder because the last campaign we played at the very end of COVID, when it was, you know, people were starting to have other commitments again. I played a goblin mage, and my friends gave me a ton of crap about, you know, like they were sort of openly racist toward goblins in the context of the game. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to show you guys, you know.
That's so cool. So when it came to the Jester, after the short story, so after you had that initial murder scene, you're like, hey, there's more here. Did you go in and just start free writing and just spitballing, just seeing what stuck? Or did you go through like, let me try to build an outline for what this story could potentially look like?
Oh, I'm very much an outliner. I find myself lost unless I know both what the ending of the story is, you know, plot wise, right? Like how are we going to resolve it, but also like kind of where the character is going, or at least where I think he might go. I mean, it changes as I go. I don't feel like I'm locked into the outline, but I need it to get going for sure. And then I like to riff on, I'm a history buff. I'm a political science buff. I'm a spy story. Like I love all of those things. And you know, way back in the day, I was in grad school for international relations and actually sort of professionally worked in some of these areas. So I have way too much arcane knowledge about obscure, you know, incidents from across history, especially 20th century history. And so I grabbed like pieces of things. So like I mean, I don't want to give away too many spoilers, but part of his sort of acting as a castle spy is very inspired by a Russian spy named Oleg Gordievsky, who was simultaneously briefing Margaret Thatcher and Gorbachev when they didn't like each other very much. And you have a really good negotiation when the person who is briefing both sides is the same person, that, you know, telling them what to ask and what to say and what the other person wants to hear. That makes things go really smooth. And then, you know, there's a big battle at the end, and that was sort of inspired by a cross section of historical battles. So I kind of take these things because then it gives me a bit of a framework, and I can be like, oh, okay, you know, by the time it's done, maybe people won't see the Battle of Midway in the final climactic battle, but it was there in the organization of it, just as a way to give me like a framework, you know?
Mm-hmm. That's too cool. All right, so sticking on that, this book has a lot of comical, laugh out loud moments. I found it funny, but also very entertaining as well. It wasn't like, oh, this is just a humor book. There was humor in the book, kind of thing. And so I'm really curious how you went through and figured out how to balance that approach between those laugh out loud moments and those emotional and also those epic moments within the novel.
Well, thanks. First of all, I'm really flattered that you found it funny because, you know, it's the one thing with writing comedy is there's no faking it, right? Like either people laugh or they didn't, and that's how you know that it worked. There's, you know, they can your aunt can tell you she loved the book, but if she didn't laugh, it's not funny, right? You know, it's like humor is tricky to explain. It's sort of like you want to find things that will resonate with people. I mean, I think that's why I like to really lean on the heart side of the story, the like slightly more cozy side, because I think you can get a lot of humor out of things that, even though, okay, look, he's a goblin, he cleans toilets, he's in this castle, the undead army is coming, and yet a lot of his emotional beats and the humor in his observations about people, I think other people will recognize, right? They see their boss or their dad or whatever, right? And that's, I think that's what makes it funny, is there's a touchstone to reality in it. And then I think also, I mean, because I play a lot of D&D and because I read a lot of fantasy, I'm up to here in the genre, but there is a part of my mind that is, craving making fun of things that I think are a little too serious, especially my D&D campaigns. I mean, I think a lot of good fantasy writers have some humor woven into their books, but my D&D circles are deadly serious about what they're doing mostly, and so in a way that almost creates in me the urge for humor, because it's like I want to make fun of this stuff, right? I want to undermine the kind of tropes and things like that. Mm-hmm. So and then I think honestly, there's something magic that happens when you get a character and his voice just kind of starts to go on his own. Like, he will sort of suggest to me the things he wants to say that that are funny, mm-hmm. right? That his observations about people, and then he's constantly kind of in trouble, right? Like, he's constantly being beaten up, or like he's the opposite of a mastermind pulling all the strings. He's pulling them all, but nothing is working the way he wants it to, right? And mm-hmm. But I find that sort of inherently funny.
So when you play D&D, are you mostly the player, or are you mostly the dungeon master? Just curious.
I'm mostly the player. We have a rotation, and right when COVID ended, it was my turn to come up as the DM. So I'm up next, although it's now been a couple of years. Everyone got really busy and it slowed right down. But no, I'm mostly the player, and mm-hmm. I have two groups, and one of them that is just sort of my circle of board gaming friends, and all our wives are friends, and we play that pretty straight. And the other one is a bunch of my friends from the entertainment industry, including a couple of professional actors and some quite successful directors. And the storytelling gets a lot crazier, almost because people want to outdo each other a little bit. There's a little bit of one-upsmanship that goes into it, in a really fun way.
Yeah, that's fun. That's a lot of fun. Okay. Now, I ask because this next question, you mentioned you're an outliner. You're primarily an outliner. You like to go through and know where all the beats are. You like to know where the story's going. So when you're going through and writing your story, do you feel like you have to write straightforward through the story from start to end? Or do you go through and go, hey, today I need to write this more dialogue heavy scene, or it's like, you know what, today I'm going to go through and write my action scenes and kind of fill in the blanks between there?
Well, mostly I like to write from beginning to end, mm-hmm. but some days when you just feel stuck, it can be really useful to just jump to something that you think is going to be easy, and that could be dialogue, but it could be an action scene. It sort of depends on what you're stuck on, right? Like, you want to go to, if I'm stuck on an action scene, I'll go to, something very talky. And then I find, like, I need the voice of the character and I need the setups in order to write the payoffs. So I do this. I have this terrible habit, and you can go online and find 1,000 creative writing people, including very famous and successful writers, saying, do not do this. And then I do it, and I'm just like, yeah, okay, but like, I just have to, which is, I'll get to a point and I'll get a little bit stuck, and I'll go back to the beginning and rewrite, putting in the thing that will help me with where I'm stuck. So if it's like, this isn't funny, or there isn't enough drama, or there isn't, like, my main character doesn't have enough agency, like he's being too passive, it's a classic one for me. Like, I'll go back in and put some additional conflict in earlier, so that the scenes that are not working now will suddenly start to work. So the beginning of my stuff is usually, I've rewritten that like 20 times, whereas the ending is usually done like what a normal writer should do, which is you write it once, maybe revise it a couple times to make it good, and then leave it alone. But I went over the beginning of Jester, I don't know how many times, just because I kept having to go back and lay in new things, or to almost like to get more momentum to push me over that hump in the middle.
What was the most challenging part about writing your first novel? Because you have all this experience writing between the movies and the games and the the D&D playing. So you have all this experience writing. So what was the most challenging part about this novel for you?
Oh, finishing it for sure. Finishing it, and then also finishing it and wrapping up all of the threads. Like if I were to say one thing that I wish I had done a little bit, well, one side of it would be I wish I had wrapped up a couple of the side threads. Not the main story, I think is wrapped up fairly well. But there's a few characters that are dangling, and I think the one way to put it is, well, I couldn't figure out what to do with that person at the end. But the flip side is, like, I want to write a sequel to it, and I didn't want to end their, the way they're in the story. Like, I want to pick up the sequel with, sort of like maybe a web of 5 characters who all already have pre-existing relationships that create certain amounts of tension. So I just decided in the end, well, okay, I'm going to leave these here, and that's what the sequel is going to be about. But yeah, just finishing it. I think that's video games. You're on a schedule. You're working to other people's demands. There's a team of 300 people all pushing for things. You can't afford to not finish things. But for movies and for especially scripts where you don't have we're going into production sort of deadline, the hardest thing in the world for me is to get to the ending, wrap up the ending, and feel like it's actually wrapped up, like it actually ended,
All right, I have a follow-up question, but we have a awesome author that's also jumped on, and he seems to have a question for you. He says, we have the great E.L. Montague. He really wants to know about the Cat in the Hat genie behind you. He needs to understand. Is that what that is behind you? Is that a Cat in the Hat genie? Like what is that behind you?
It kind of is, and I'm a huge fan of EL. So I don't think we've ever met, but I'm super stoked that you're on. So first of all, I messed up the mounting of this thing, and I have to go get it remounted. It is a Dr. Seuss. It's a poster of a Dr. Seuss print. The actual print of this thing cost the moon. So I don't want anyone to think that that's the real one is on my office wall. But it's called The Cat from the Wrong Side of the Tracks, and it is Dr. Seuss did a bunch of art for adults that isn't, it's very Dr. Seuss, right? But it's not in a book. It's not part of any collection. And after he died, they made limited edition prints of them, and then you can obviously for $20 buy the poster. So I really wanted the original of that. I think it's about 30 grand US, so that's a little out of my office decor price range. A little closer to the mortgage on the house, but I got the poster and just had it mounted. So I loved it. I think it's cool. He's a little washed out with the lighting. He's got really interesting sort of facial features as well.
I agree. It looks fantastic. Yeah, it looks really cool. And
he's playing billiards. That's the Dr. Seuss billiard table that my head is in front of.
Yeah, he says he's got a pool cue with him. So Ted has another question for you before I jump into my follow up. Ted says, I feel as a fantasy author, world building would be one of the most challenging aspects of writing. How did you tackle that?
I read a ton of fantasy, and I'm not a huge fan of people that stop the story to build the world out. So for me, I wanted something that was as minimalist as possible, but still set up the kind of characters and the heart of the thing. And then I weave in extra bits as necessary. So at the beginning, you really just know that he works in the basement of a castle, that he cleans toilets. It's clearly a fantasy medieval castle, but what the wider world is like and the rules of magic or anything like that, none of that is really very well explained. And being a goblin slave who was living in a swamp and then got carted off to a castle, he doesn't really know how magic works. So later on, when there's a character who befriends him, who's clearly a very powerful mage, it's sometimes hard for Shelley to tell if the guy's making cupcakes or a magical potion. He's messing around with stuff, but it's never 100% clear to him what is actually going on there. And of course, Buckingham, who's the mage, is having a lot of fun with the fact that people don't fully understand what like what goes into it. That's part of his mystique is that nobody knows, and so then I didn't need to build out the magic system and explain it in a Brandon Sanderson. I love those books. Like, it's, don't get me wrong, but for me it was just I wanted to stay with the characters. So the world is actually not all that well defined, and I think in the next book, where if there's a sequel, when I get around to a sequel, it will expand out the world. The political world will get wider, and that's actually the most daunting part of it. Is I know the historical references I want to draw from, but explaining all that and how it all fits together is challenging, for sure, without slowing the story down.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned you like starting your characters at the bottom of the barrel, or with a big growth opportunity as a character. But what made you decide about Shelley being a goblin? Like, what made it go like, hey, this is where I want to go through it? And did the character evolve into it over time? So was it a goblin always for Shelley, or did you decide something else and he turned into a goblin for you?
No, he was always a goblin, and again, it comes out of playing D&D. So before he had any personality, he was a goblin. Like, that was the original starting point, was what's the inner life of a goblin like?
Okay.
They're clearly intelligent, they can talk, so what's going on in his world? And then from there it was, okay, well, I'm going to have him captured and enslaved, and then I'm going to make the people who are more powerful than him, he certainly feels at the beginning in particular that they're all a lot stupider than him. They're just bigger and more violent, and they have as I think he puts it, they have iron and a natural born instinct to march in formation, which means that they can conquer him, but it doesn't mean they're very good at managing their own affairs. And so that was the heart of it, was sort of starting him as a goblin, then thinking, well, how can I dig him into the worst possible hole? And then what would he think about that?
So you mentioned you played as a goblin and you got ragged on by friends during your D&D games. Did any of the characters within the Jester coincide with some personalities of your friends? Did you add them into the story, or did you add in some of the characters that they played, maybe not them specifically, but enough where they might have known, like, oh, that's supposed to be me or my character in this story?
In Jester, it's a little more vague than that. Like, I think basically the humans who are running the castle at the beginning, or the duchy of Halfsock, but it's such a small duchy that really it's just the castle and the surrounding. It's never fully defined how wide the borders are, but it's clearly not a large, prosperous or expansive place. They have the attitude of the people I played with, like that they're superior to everyone else, that this is just the way that the world is set up, right? Is just that humans, and particularly fighters, are at the top of the food chain along with mages, and everyone else is just kind of there for them to use. In Major Domo, which is about a guy who's like the head butler of a dungeon, some of the characters or some of the people I play with do appear as much more like finely drawn characters, because since he manages a dungeon, his problem he's got a whole set of life issues he's dealing with, but his day-to-day problem is that these so-called do-gooders keep showing up wanting to steal all their stuff and murder everyone that lives there, right? And so bands of super parties keep coming along, and his challenge is, how does he deal with them? And so, yeah, some of the characters in that story are straight out of my D&D campaigns. I mean, to the point of even some of the names are the same as the character names, like not their actual names.
Oh, that's cool. Oh, that's real cool. So we've talked about the hardest part of the novel for you to go through. What part of the Jester are you most proud of within the Jester? Whether is it a character arc? Is it a twist? What was the most part of the book that you're proud of?
Well, I think so. I'll answer that in two ways. One is the things that I thought when I finished it, and then the other is the things that I get as feedback from people. Because sometimes, I might think something is great, but that doesn't necessarily mean the readers do. But the thing I liked most was Shelley's kind of character arc and the way that he goes from utter powerlessness to actually influencing things, but without, I thought, well, okay, he's a goblin and a slave, and he, one of the things that, and that, I don't want to get into spoilers or anything, but he needs to stay a slave. Like if he loses his enslavement on page 10, like then you've undermined the whole point of making him that. So I wanted him to influence things, but without becoming overpowered. In the classic, I mean, I love these books where the teenager learns to ride dragons and become super badass, and in the end they win, but they basically won by becoming the most overpowered D&D character in the entire campaign, where they can just massacre people, right? So I wanted him to remain like on one level powerless, but achieve his kind of the power that he had, and so the power that he has to change the story, and so I'm really proud of how that came out. And then I guess the feedback I get that I like the most, or that makes me feel the most proud, is when people just say they're along for the ride with Shelley. Like there's numerous people in reviews or just in messages, or like, we'll live and die with Shelley. We're with Shelley for life. My sister-in-law, like going out another one, just sent a text message the other day, and she's like, I'm halfway through, and if this goblin dies, you're in serious trouble. So, she's like, she's sufficiently invested that she's like, you better not lead me down a road and give me an unhappy ending to this book. And I'm like, I'm not saying anything, but, but I'm glad you care, so.
That's so awesome. That's so funny. So I want to stick with Shelley a little bit, because I really love the character, and knowing that like that's a big moment when people really resonate, definitely with a goblin. That's not, as you mentioned at the beginning of this conversation, that people just tend to just in video games or in D&D games, it's like, oh, there's a goblin, just kill it real quick, and we'll keep going to what we're doing. So they're always the fodder that everyone wants to go through and take out. So you mentioned Shelley was the first aspect of your story. You went through the short story with Shelley solving a murder. So how did you go from Goblin, Shelley having the worst job in the world, to solving a murder, to being that character who really reshapes a full kingdom? Like, how did you get to that point of being, hey, this is kind of where I want the story going?
Well, I think I thought, well, okay, what's the most dire and impossible to solve threat? Well, what if this not very strong, not very rich kingdom, had this just unbeatable army somewhere over the horizon? It's like you're sort of whatever, you're in Central Europe in the 13th or 14th century, and the Mongols are coming, and you just kind of know that you never win against Genghis Khan, right? So what are you going to do? And then, having done that, it's like, well, okay, what, I sort of put my political science background to work and said, well, okay, how would you like make this a more functional kind of castle, and how would you like address a threat like this? And so, how would you make allies with your enemies and things like that are at the center of that part of the story? And what would you, who are your antagonists now? In that, is, yes, the big army is over the horizon somewhere, but your bigger problem is the sort of some of the local, barons and things who don't want the status quo to change, and who are getting rich off the status quo, and kind of can't get their head around the idea that maybe we need to make sacrifices for the common good. So, I think, a classic. It's a classic political story that it plays out today. It's played out the last 2,000 years. Pick your, you can find examples of that in the Roman Empire, the Ottoman Empire, the British, pick your era. There's always people acting that way. And so it both resonates, but it makes for some fun opponents, who are not the big, it's almost like the Skeleton Queen and the Undead Army are almost like the weather, right? Like, yeah, they're coming. The hurricane is coming, but your real opponents are the people who won't let you, sort of build flood protection.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for For me, within this story, I felt at its core, it's about rising above your role in society. For you as the author, and this could be obviously perspective could change from when you originally wrote the story to what it is after it's been out a little bit. But from a message or feeling perspective, what did you hope readers would walk away from after finishing this book?
One of the things, and it's funny because there are a set of ideas that I often come back to in stories, and I've been doing it for decades. And yet, when I started this book, I had completely forgotten about them. And then halfway through, it's like, oh yeah, I'm going back to that again. But I'm a big fan of Albert Camus, who wrote a book called The Plague. It's about a city being quarantined from the bubonic plague in the 1940s. But the whole thing is a metaphor for France being occupied by the Nazis. But one of his main things is that, and he says in the book, like this, you might think this is a story about heroism, but it's not. It's about decency. And the only way to defeat the plague is with decency. And he's talking about the Nazis, right? But one of his central kind of things he returns to in his novels is that it's like decent people acting decently, even in just the micro ways of their life, right? Like you don't have to be going out and winning the big battle to be a part of the solution to things. And that really resonates with me. And so I think if you were to really break down what Shelley does, you will find that the core of his character isn't like just a Machiavellian schemer, and he obviously is not powerful enough to do anything by brute force. But the heart of his success is his decency, and he's coming at it from the point of view of a decent person, and that's how he wins his friends, and it's how he is able to sway people. And at the crucial moments, it's about things like getting people to trust each other. And he does that by trusting them or by making himself vulnerable. So it's not, even though there is the occasional back that gets stabbed, it's not a story where that's how you solve the problems. It's a story fundamentally about decency. And that's kind of what I want people to take away from this story and from Major Domo and the ones I'm working on in the future. And I also think there's fun in characters that are, they're both classic D&D canon fodder, but they're always just blanket assumed to be evil, right? But not because they've done anything evil, just because we've said so that we can go massacre them. And so having them be the most decent people in the story is fun. Like it creates, interesting tension and things like that. So.
Perfect. No, I like that. Decency. Yeah. All right. We are at the lightning round time. So anyone that's not familiar with the lightning round, I'm going to go through and give Tim about 9 quick questions. He has to go through and answer these without thinking. Okay, real quick. They're real easy. Most of them are A or B type of questions. All right, you ready?
I'm ready.
Perfect. All right, as a reader, do you prefer plot twist or slow burns?
Plot twist.
Are you more of a fan of goblins or orcs?
Goblins for sure.
What's a favorite book of yours that everyone sleeps on?
Oh man, that's a tougher one. Because I'll say this. Like, so for instance, I love Kings of the Wild by Nicholas Eames, but it's so successful. I don't know if we can really say everyone's sleeping on it. But another book that I think fits into that is J. Zachary Pike's Orconomics, which has very similar vibes to it, but it's indie self-published. And then I think the other one is The Dungeoneers by Jeffrey Russell. Same thing, having fun with the world of D&D, heartfelt characters, really sort of fun twisting of tropes.
So I've read 2 of the 3. I've not read Dungeoneers, so I got to add that one to the list. But yeah, Kings of the Wild and Orconomics. I read book 1 out of both of them. I think Orconomics has 3 books, if I'm not mistaken.
So yeah,
and Kings of the Wild currently has 2.
That's right.
I know about. There, I think a third one's coming out. Supposed to be coming out in the next year or 2. So I need to go through and catch up on both of them. But yeah, both of them are fantastic, fantastic, fun stories. All right, one word to describe Jester, and you can't say funny.
Heartfelt.
Do you prefer more paperback, hardback, or digital copies?
Paperback for sure.
Favorite trope?
Well, favorite in the sense of favorite because I'm going to bend it inside out, or favorite like I like to read it?
I will let you interpret that question.
Okay, so let's see.
Yeah.
Favorite. I'm trying to think. Like I'm reading Guy Gabriel Kay's River of Stars right now. So he has like the fated hero, like the hero. One of the heroes just as a kid knows he's born to save the kingdom. You can do that badly, but like in his books, I really enjoy the way that he executes that. So, and then trope that I like to turn inside out is usually the classic bad guy. Like, so one of the characters in Major Domo is a necromancer who's the most decent guy in the story. And somewhere down the road, I really hope to write a long version of his life story. And he's a necromancer who's fundamentally a decent guy in a world that does not view necromancy as decent, and then will overlook all the other nice things he does just because he raises the dead, and that's bad, and therefore he must be a bad guy regardless of everything else that is happening around him. So that sort of almost like I love the fated hero, and I'm going to say I love to turn inside out the fated bad guy.
Perfect. All right, my favorite one. What's your least favorite trope? Your least. I wouldn't say despise, that's a strong word. But what's one where you mostly roll your eyes on a lot of the times?
In part because I once upon a time sort of worked for various militaries as an analyst. I can't stand the one where the training of whoever it is, Dragon Riders, Commandos, the Emperor's Blades, is like super lethal and half the trainees are going to die. Like you can't run a military training program where you kill half your recruits. That's just ridiculous. So every time I see that, I roll my eyeballs, which is not to say I don't finish the books and don't love them. I love the Emperor's Blades, and believe it or not, I actually liked Fourth Wing quite a lot. But I rolled my eyeballs every time another student got incinerated because I'm like, oh, come on. I mean, I get why you have to have it, but I definitely roll my eyes at that.
Perfect. Who's your favorite villain of all time? And it does not have to be from a book. Favorite villain.
Wow, that's a tough one. I mean, I love the works of John le Carre, so this is totally outside of fantasy, but Carla is a great villain. Even though you rarely see him, you just feel his manipulation of whoever Smiley is dealing with at the moment. I'm trying to think of a classic villain that I really enjoyed. I honestly find like a lot of books, the villain is the weakest link in the chain a little bit. So, I kind of like Voldemort if we're going to go. That's the one that is just popping to mind. If we're doing rapid fire and I don't have time to think about it, I thought Voldemort, like he grew and evolved as a bad guy, and we got a sense for who his backstory was, and he worked for me as worthy of the sort of ridiculous, over the top big bad that obviously can't be beaten, and at the same time obviously is gonna get beaten in the end.
So. EL said my favorite one, so I had to toss his name up here.
Well, and Moriarty, again, which Moriarty? So, for instance, in the Sherlock TV series, where it's the same actor who played the hot priest in Fleabag, that guy was amazing. I love that Moriarty. But in the books, I honestly, I read them, but it's so long ago.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of his. And there's a book that I got that the story revolves around Moriarty. Like Sherlock is gone. There's a bunch of murders that are happening. They're like, we need someone really smart to help us. And they go to Moriarty and say, please help us. And he goes, all right. But you know, there's an underlining, like, there's something else going on with him. But he said, I'm going to help you guys solve this murder. So it's, you get a whole story as him being the lead, which I find very interesting and intriguing. Because I'm the same way. I like getting a little bit more understanding from like the villain side of, or the quote, people who are supposed to be the villains, and try to understand their perspective and why they're doing things. So I need to go through and like actually sit down and read the book. But yeah, it has one of my favorite villains in it as the main lead, so it should be a fun one. All right, I have two more for you, and these two are my favorite ones. So, one book you wish you'd written.
I'm going to say Under Heaven by Guy Gavriel Kay, and I'll throw an extra one in there, which is one of my biggest inspirations for a lot of what I do is Catherine Addison's The Goblin Emperor, which I just love the heart of that book. Like it's very similar to Jester in the sense that the main character is in over his head. He doesn't know what he's doing. He's so outside of the castle, like politics and culture, that like he doesn't have any of the protocol, right? He's complete outsider, and he wins through his sense of decency. Like he starts to make decisions based on what he thinks is the right thing to do. Often just, like the book starts with a terrible Zeppelin accident that kills the royal family, and he's the only one of the whole nobility that goes to the funeral of like the crew that also died, right? Because he's like, well, these family lost all their people too, and they were serving, they were just doing their jobs. And so he goes and meets the families and sort of shows respect for their loss. And you're like, oh, this guy's great. So yeah, I would love to have written that book.
Awesome. All right, my last question, and this one I ask every single interview because I find it awesome. If your book could have a theme song, so the Jester has a theme song, what would be that song?
Oh, dear Lord. I am not musical, so how am I going to answer this? If my wife was here, what would be its theme song? It's got to be like an underdog tale, but it's got to have almost like a country western vibe, because he's constantly getting smacked around and he's constantly losing on his way to winning. I'm trying to think of a song where you're constantly losing on your way to winning. You may have stumped me on that one. In part just because of my sheer lack of good pop culture musical references. If something jumps into my mind, I'll come back to it, but I don't have a good answer for that.
So I do have an answer, but Ted jumped in. He said Friends in Low Places. So I think that's Garth Brooks. I put Safety Dance by Men's Without Hats.
Oh, wow.
Is what I was thinking for this. I felt like that song, it's very fun, but has a very serious undertone of what the song's about. I feel like that goes great with the Jester. It has its serious and good moments as well. So that's what I put down for.
I'll go with that. Yeah, you definitely want something that you're sort of laughing, but at the same time, the stakes are high.
Exactly.
For sure.
Exactly. All right. So jumping into my next question, and I wrote this question before I knew your background of writing amazing, fantastic video games and writing amazing movies as well. Dead Rising, I think that's crazy. I've watched both of them. I think it's the same Dead Rising that I'm thinking about. It's based off of that crazy video game. Is that the one?
Yeah, for sure. There's only 2 Dead Rising movies, so that's me.
Yeah. So I've seen them both, and that's awesome. So had no idea till this conversation, which is awesome. But so for the Jester, then, if you really had free range of how this story could potentially be adapted, what would be your dream medium for the Jester? Would it be just an awesome big film? Would you rather have it kind of a slower burn, like a a TV series, or are you thinking something completely different, like, hey, let's go graphic novel type of story? What do you think from an adaptation perspective?
You know, I think an animated series, which has become quite popular on Netflix, right? In line with that one they did for League of Legends. So something where you're doing really high quality animation, so you're capturing facial expressions and you're capturing the emotions. But I think it's very well suited to animation, and I would like to do a series because I think what you want to do is spend time with the characters and play it out. I think that in the sort of rule of thumb in Hollywood is that a movie is all about the ending, right? That's what when people walk out of the theater, they remember the end of the movie, and honestly, they will forgive you a lot of flaws in the middle if the ending is great. And if the ending is crummy, then you might have executed beautifully until the end, and they'll still won't love it. I think Blair Witch Project is probably the best ever example. The ending is terrifying, but if you go back and watch the whole movie, the first 70% of it is kind of slow. But whereas a TV series is more about the journey, and it's more about the characters and wanting to come back and live with these people over and over again. And we're heading toward an ending, but like Battlestar Galactica took 6 seasons or something, depending on they had sort of 2A and 2B in that to ever find Earth at the end of the story. It's almost not about finding Earth, right? It's about the journey along the way. So I'd love for it to be that kind of a story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's I think that's a perfect one. I think that's a perfect one. What other genres? So you mentioned you were thinking potentially about doing a book 2 for the Jester, which is super exciting. Super glad to hear that. But is there any other genres or themes or styles that you are looking to explore in the future, either from a novelization perspective? You mentioned horror, so I know you want to go potentially a horror route, which is going to be very, very cool with your current writing style with the Jester. But I'm curious what else you're interested in exploring in the future.
For sure. So on the fantasy side, I mean, there's so many ideas, right? So it's almost I have to force myself to focus on one. So I'm most of the way through a draft of the next book, which is again, it's sort of I'm stealing inspiration from Terry Pratchett's Discworld. So all the books take place in the same world. At some point, characters will start to overlap, and certainly the institutions and the organizations kind of flow through them. But they're not classic so far sequels in the sense of, it's Shelley and then we go to the next part of Shelley's story. But I do have, I have a sequel in mind for Major Domo. I have a sequel in mind for Shelley and for Jester. And then I have probably 6 or 7 other ideas. But I think that the other thing I want to do is explore some horror stories, because that's how I broke into film. The first movie scripts that I wrote, where I just wrote them on spec and then found an agent and they got the agent to sell them and they actually got bought, were all horror stories. And so that's my other kind of love, right? But B, I have a lot of these scripts, and later on in my career I wrote adaptations of in particular video games, but also a few books and a few sequels. I wrote a sequel that never got made to The Hollow Man. I wrote a sequel to Invasion of the Body Snatchers that never got off the ground. But I obviously can't turn that into a novel, but a lot of the early work would lend itself, and the whole thing is sort of mapped out. I have the beginning, the middle, and the end. I have the characters, I have the voice. So it's a shortcut to having another book come out. And so I'm hoping to sort of start that as a parallel thread, and kind of crossing my fingers that the fans of Jester and Major Domo will forgive me if all of a sudden I'm off with zombies and vampires. And it may be that I sort of have two parallel tracks and hop back and forth between them. Because I know some people, I think I read everything, right? I mean, I'll read biographies, I'll read really deep history books, nonfiction, and I like science fiction, I like fantasy, I like sort of classic modern day spy stories. I'll read sort of you want to call it literary fiction. I mean, I'm all over the place, right? But I know some people like to really zero in on something. So, I'm a little nervous about adding horror to fantasy and finding the right tone, because I think it'll still be kind of funny and kind of ridiculous, but hopefully still sort of scary and tense, right? Which in horror, you have to have laughs in horror to kind of release the tension, right? That's
Mhm.
a pretty standard thing. And when I was working for, like I wrote a couple of horror movies for Universal Studios, and you would get notes saying, "Look, it's been 10 minutes since something funny happened. You need to put one in here." And then you get another note back saying, "Okay, it's been 10 minutes since anything scary happened. What, have a cat jump out of the closet, man. Come on." And so they really had a sense for the metrics of those things. And so, um, threading that needle and then also balancing them out so that people who like Jester aren't suddenly confused and annoyed that it's a completely different genre.
Mhm. So from that, so the Jester world that you're building, which I think is very cool, from a creating it kind of like how the disc world is, where it's like I have the world, people understand the setup of the world, but I can jump around and tell different types of stories, which I think is an amazing, really cool idea. From your horror stories perspective, are these all going to be standalone, or are you thinking about doing the exact same thing but from a horror side of the house?
Well, because I'm picking them up from stories I've already worked out, I think what I'm going to do is do a couple of zombie ones first. So I have a zombie story about a guy who's trapped in a city that's been quarantined, and he's really not a very nice person at all. Like, he's kind of the worst version of himself, and he's also totally unequipped to be in a zombie story. And then as time goes by and things get worse and worse for him, he slowly goes crazy. But in the process, as he starts to hallucinate and to like his the physical stress he's under kind of collapses into the psychological stress he's under, he actually becomes the best version of himself. And so, he sort of confronts his insecurities and his fears and some of his bad behavior, and finds his courage. And by the end of it, he's actually become like kind of the best version of that person you could hope for, but he's completely bonkers. And he's trapped, he's trapped in this city that's been walled off so the zombies don't get out. And it's not clear to him, but it's clear to everyone else that, like, he's never getting out, right? Like, they're never gonna say, like, at one point maybe they'll flatten the city, but they're never gonna let the poor people stuck inside out. And then I have other stories that take place in and around this kind of quarantined off city that are sort of, they're a metaphor for COVID or for other things going on. So I think in that case, there'll be a series of books that all take place around a Midwestern American city that has a containment wall around it, including how the containment wall got there. But then once it's there, it's kind of there, and so, and there's people stuck inside and there's people stuck outside. And so there'll be a whole series of stories there. And then there'll be another one that there was, when I first started to get traction in Hollywood, was running up to 2010 when the Olympics were in Vancouver. And the city of Vancouver really, really wanted it to work well. It turned out to be fantastic. I was actually kind of skeptical, but it was an amazing experience for the whole city. But in the run up to it, people were really stressed because they're spending a ton of money, and there's always cost overruns, and the road's not finished, and whatever. There's always problems. And I thought this would be a really fun story in which, a kind of jaundiced cop comes, and he's been brought in for some other reason, but he's got specialized knowledge about supernatural creatures. And he realizes there's a vampire at hunting in Vancouver, but nobody in authority wants to even give the vaguest hint that this is happening because there's this massive tourist event coming in 6 months, and that if you were to put that out there, nobody would come, right? And so the coroner is finding the most absurd reasons for why bodies are being found with no blood in them, and like they're papering over the whole thing. And then our hero sort of both has he's got a monster he's got Hannibal Lecter he's got to catch, but the whole institution around him is very invested in covering it up. And that kind of leads into a world in which there are police that are chasing that monsters werewolves, vampires, what have you. They're sort of like serial killers. Like they're out there. There aren't that very many of them. It's a specialized law enforcement problem, but people tend to get a bit hysterical if one of them is around, and nobody really knows. Like there's been in the various cities I've lived in, there have been some very, very public serial killer cases that where I was there, and in one case I was actually dating a prosecutor at the time. So I was getting all the scoop every night right over dinner, and but it was a big thing. It was part of the popular culture. And then other times there's everything is nice and calm, but somewhere off, in the places where nobody is looking, bad things are happening. And so both of those are pretty fun settings for horror stories, I think.
Yeah, both sound amazing. I really like the serial killer to supernatural type of creatures comparison. I never went through and thought about um, that potential kind of comparison. Like, that's very cool and a different idea to go through and think about. That you can do a lot with a series from like a horror perspective of like this guy on this team hunting down these different cases around the world, and I think that's really cool. And then I think the Under the Dome zombie potential series, I feel like you could do a lot with that idea as well, which is very, very cool. Because you can do the same thing that you're doing with the Jester series, where it's like you truly don't know as the reader, are these people going to survive till the end? Just because there's 5 books in the series, every book has a different cast of characters, but they're in the same area. So it elevates it a little bit more of like, oh my goodness, is my favorite people actually going to make it to the end? Or is everyone going to be dead by the end of this story? Which I find very cool and very different than what's kind of being done with normal zombie type stories. Because you can more times than not figure out like this person's going to be good or this person's not based off of their characters within the story. So I really like that idea.
Yeah, and I love the idea of not knowing what's going to happen. I mean, I think in all forms of fiction, to me, one of the really marks of a good book is when they've set it up in such a way that you don't know. Whether it's like Game of Thrones, they kill Ned Stark at the end of book 1, and it's just like a big flag planted in the ground. Don't get comfortable, right? Like anyone can and will die. You can see there's like 5,000 pages of story still to go. The guy you thought was the main character of the whole thing, gets the axe at the end of book 1. It's like, oh, that's fantastic. And there's other ways to do that as well. But when you really don't know what's going to happen, as opposed to, hey, it's a spy movie, the hero's Brad Pitt or Tom Cruise, like it doesn't matter how crazy the stunts are, you pretty much know Tom Cruise isn't dying in Mission Impossible, right? So like that takes something away from to my mind, the enjoyment of it. And I think you can do it without going full grimdark and just, making it so everybody dies, right? There's clever ways to do it, and there's also clever ways to lose. Like one way to lose is someone puts a sword through you, but another way to lose is you had this thing that you really wanted to accomplish and you didn't accomplish it. So I think that there's lots of ways to put people in jeopardy. So I think that those are fun. And obviously, if it's a horror story, you really, really want people to you want people to not know who's going to make it, right? There's 6 campers go to the cabin in the woods, only one's walking out. But let's tell the story in such a way. Having actually written a couple of Cabin in the Woods movies that never got made, but we want to really have a sense for not being confident about who is coming out of that. That's half the fun of it, I think.
As a reader of those type of stories, yes, I love it when I get so invested in a character and then they get taken out. Like I love it. Those are my favorite types of stories. I'm like, oh my goodness, you broke me right now. Because I really thought this character was going to make it to the end, and you decided, nope, they're done now. So yeah, huge fan. Love those types of stories. I want to ask you, because you've had an awesome career so far up to this point. And I'm really curious from your perspective, what does success look like for you professionally and personally?
Well, that's a really good question. I think, I mean, on the simplest level, it's that I can support myself while writing, and that's always been the struggle is finding a way to, when I first started in writing movies, I wasn't being paid anything, right? So I had worked on a magazine. They had closed the magazine. It was sort of in the era when, print was starting to die, and we got a really good kind of golden parachute. So I had some runway to not make any money, but that kind of gave me that first period of complete abject failure before I needed to succeed in any way. And I think that that's true. Video games is a little more fee for service, so you can, when I got hired to do that, you get paid by the hour, and on Thursday, I remember I had been working in the movies for maybe a decade, and I was working at United Front Games, which is the guys that made Sleeping Dogs. And someone came by my desk on Thursday and put a check on it. And I'm like, what is this? And they're like, what's payday, dude? What do you think it is? And it's like, wow, in the movies, if you get paid 6 months after the thing is delivered, you've done well, right? So, but yeah, so, I think the first thing is being able to support myself telling stories is awesome. And that's always a struggle. I mean, that's witness working in 3 different industries simultaneously, because, if you can't find a paying gig in one, you got to go banging on doors for where you can put your skills to use and still get a paycheck. And in a perfect world, I would love to one day migrate just to fiction and actually have that be, enough to make a living. But that is by no means where I am now. So I rely on video games, where I have a longer track record and where I can, sort of drop into projects as a gun for hire in order to actually make a living. I am really gratified by the success that Jester and Major Domo have had, but it's nowhere close to quit your day job.
Yeah. Is there anything you're working on now that you're allowed to talk about?
In the video game space?
In the video game space, yeah.
The most I think I can say is I am a hired gun on a big Ubisoft title, but I'm only there kind of when they need me. And so the peculiarities of that project mean they don't need me every day. And then before that, I was working for a company called T-0 on another big game, which hasn't been announced yet. So fingers crossed on that. And before that, I was running the writer's room. So I created and staffed the writer's room for the Gears of War E-Day, which is the new Gears of War coming out. That was 2022. So that's 3 years ago. The game still isn't out yet. And the writer's room broke the whole story, but then that was the story they needed to get into production, so that they were going into making the game with a story in hand. But it's going to be 3 or 4 years of making the game, and those things change, right? So how much of my work will actually be in the final version is anybody's guess. So it's, there's various projects that are out there, and the video game industry really cares about confidentiality. So, the most I can say is I'm working on an Ubisoft title in a freelancey sort of way.
Awesome. Yeah, I don't want to get you in trouble, so I won't push anymore with the video game side of the house. So awesome. We have Jester 2 being worked on. We have potential 2 new worlds in the horror genre that could be coming out. Is there anything else that you're mulling over, you're going through and working on from a novelization perspective?
Yeah, so Jester 2 is like a flicker in my imagination. I mean, I kind of know where I think I want the story to go, but I have not even started to really, really dig down on it. And then also, so Jester is there, but it's somewhere in the future. I'm most of the way through the 3rd book in that series, which is called, the working title is Familiar, which is a story of a classic D&D familiar who keeps being summoned out of the ether by a first level mage only to be sent on a ridiculous suicide mission during which she dies horribly. And, she basically commits herself. I mean, they're on a quest. The party that she keeps being pulled into is on a quest for this thing, that a MacGuffin that nobody even quite knows why they're going for it. But her personal quest is to redefine the rules by which her life is governed, so that she doesn't have to keep being sent on these terrible, I mean, if you play D&D, they're always sending the familiar forward to push a button and see if it sets off a fireball, or, poke a sleeping troll to see if he's dead or not. And the familiar never comes out of that well. So, so again, a completely powerless character. She doesn't even control her life or death, and that she has to do what the mage tells her to do. And she's going to embark on a journey of essentially negotiating with her creator in order to change the rules of her life. So I'm I have a draft of that, and I'm just trying to make it good and fun and heartfelt and all the other things after you have a crummy draft. And then after that, I've got a short story that, like a lot of indie authors, I occasionally will put a short story out for my mailing list and to read for free, as a way of inducing people to join my mailing list. So I'm most of the way done. Like literally, I think I might have it next week. A short story about a young man whose mother really wants him to become the village healer. And in the process of training for that, he discovers a sort of a Mozart level, sort of whatever you want to say, inbuilt talent for necromancy. And so he has to decide, that's obviously not socially condoned. So does he embrace his creativity, which just turns out to be like, he doesn't really know what he wants to be in life. And then all of a sudden he finds his talent, but his talent is for something everyone else is terrified of and hates. And so how do you like, what choice do you make there? And that's the beginning of the origin story of the necromancer from Major Domo. So I'm hoping that the short story will turn into a book, which might even, I mean, his in that book, it's just vague incidents are hinted at, but it speaks to like a 500-year life of doing interesting things. So you can make a, like a big, thick doorstopper trilogy out of his all the various things that have happened to him.
Awesome. Yeah, that sounds amazing. Cannot wait to go through and read that one. Familiar, when are you thinking that's probably going to come out? Since you're still kind of tweaking it, you thinking sometime in 2026 is what you're shooting for?
So there's a couple different things. One is, when will the book be good enough to start the process of leaving my hands? So then it goes to proofreaders, editors, beta readers, that whole process. I'm hoping it's there by the end of September, but honestly, like nothing I've ever written in fiction has gone as quickly as I thought it was going to. And then I think the second question will be, like, what's the right way to release it? So like Major Domo was just kind of released for fun, and then I entered it in a couple of contests, and it was lucky enough to win one of them. So it sort of gained momentum all on its own, right? That was the Sphinx, the Speculative Fiction Independent Novella Championship, I think is what that acronym was. And so Jester was coming out right as the finals for that were going, and I thought to myself, I'm going to find readers here and then carry them over to there. And it didn't really work very well. So I think I have some sort of thinking, and also bugging all my fellow indie authors for advice to figure out what the right trajectory from, okay, I'm done, I still need to get a cover and things like that. But, it's edited, the book is there. The run up to when it's released, and how much time to spend trying to get reviews, trying to get interviews like this one, trying to line all those ducks up. I honestly don't know what the right answer to that is yet, but my guess is longer than I spent on Jester. So yeah, that's a very long way of saying probably in 2026 somewhere.
Perfect. Yeah, we'll talk. I'll give you some names of people. As soon as we get off this, I'll give you some names of people who I think did it really, really well on really promoting their stuff, and who really enjoy the marketing side of the house. I guarantee we can connect. I give you some potential leads to go through. and think of
That's
something.
fantastic. I mean, the community is really great. That's one of the things
Mhm.
that I think the independent author community, and even like I'm made friends with a bunch of traditionally published authors, and they're also extremely welcoming
Mhm.
and willing to give advice and give you time and invite you over for lunch and things like that. But I'm a complete rookie in that area, and I definitely sort of felt my rookie chops on Jester. So I'm hoping to up my game a little bit, and that's just a question of being humble and going and asking people what they did, and then sort of putting together a plan based on
Mhm.
merging ideas from this person with that person.
Yeah, I truly love this community of the whole indie author, and even the traditional authors. The ones I've spoken with all have been fantastic too. Yeah, everyone's very open and very nice and honest, and they want, like, you can feel majority of people really want everyone to succeed. It's like raising tides kind of thing, and not pushing other people down to lift yourself up. I haven't seen that. So if it's happening other areas. Everywhere I'm seeing, everyone's like, no, we all rise together, which is very, very cool in this community.
I think that's very true. I think it's that there's a lot of that in the video game writing industry as well. I'm on a bunch of group chats, and every once in a while the different narrative people will get together on a Zoom call or Teams call. I definitely felt like in Hollywood there was a sense that, look, they're only going to commission one writer, and so it's me versus you was a bit of a thing, and so it's really refreshing to come into fiction and find people so willing to help out or collaborate or give you advice. There's I really haven't felt anyone sort of like, well, I got the secret sauce I don't want to share. It's like, it's more the opposite way, which is people who have something that's working, like they want to, they really badly want you to use their process, even though it
Mhm.
might not be quite the right fit for me. So it's, people are really strong advocates for the things that have worked for them. But like from a good place, like from a, look, I figured this out, I think it would work for you. You gotta like follow these steps, sort of thing.
Yeah, people do. Yeah, no one keeps anything close to their chest when it comes to promoting and marketing and trying to get your name out there. Everyone's like, no, here you go. Worst thing that it can do is it doesn't work, but here you go. And they go through and just share their knowledge. It's fantastic. It's a cool, amazing partnership. Um, so for you, Tim, from your perspective, what kind of readers do you think's going to resonate most with the Jester? Trying to that final sell to the people that are watching.
Well, I think it's clearly it has some humor to it, so it's there for people that enjoy a fun read. I mean, I think at the end of the day, the core thing I want, that I was trying to do, is to make a read that's really fun. So it's fast paced. It's got high stakes, so it's not strictly speaking cozy, but I like to call it cozy stabby. So it's, there's a modest amount of violence and then a big huge battle at the end, but uh, and there's really, I mean, sex plays a role in the plot, but there's no sex in the book, there's no descriptions of sex. Who is sleeping with who is a part of the different threads that are going on. So I think it's people that love fantasy and aren't locked into, it must be this particular take on it. So I'm bending any number of different tropes around, but always out of a love of the genre, the role playing games that sort of run parallel with it, and I think the storytelling tropes that often define fantasy. So, and then there's a political, like there's a lot of politics in there, but mostly done in a kind of tongue in cheek sort of way.
Mm-hmm. So I appreciate you coming on, Tim. This has been a long overdue conversation. I feel like. How can people go through and connect with you, find your work? How can people support you? What's the best way for people to go through and support you?
Well, thanks very much. I really appreciate it. I think I do a mailing list, and I'm a couple of my friends who are really quite successful authors were really lobbying me to put out newsletters more often than I do, which I aim for one a month at the moment. And but I come from a journalism background, so they're like, surely you can do 750 words on demand. I mean, come on, and make it engaging. So but yes, if you can find me on Blue Sky or Twitter at TBCart, and from there you can find my mailing list. And if you join, you'll see the free stories when they come out. You'll hear news about the progress of the books. Like every indie author, every once in a while things go on sale or are part of a group or part of a package or a bundle. I mean, I'm learning about all of those things, but every time I've done one, I've really enjoyed it, but B, they've been very, very successful. So you can keep up to date there. And I also put out like chapters of works in progress. So right now, I will re-put it in the new newsletter, but like the first chapter of Familiar, and probably soon the first 2 or 3 will be there for people to download for free, and you can kind of see, there's no promise that's actually what the final version is going to look like, but you can see who the character is and what her voice is and how the story is coming along, and I'll aim to share as many things as possible there. So I am also on Instagram, but honestly, my wife curates that as much as anything. It's a little bit Greek to me, so I sort of follow my fellow authors that are there. But Blue Sky I'm quite active on, and I still stay on Twitter a little bit as well.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. Well, I will also make sure that your website link is in the description below, so anyone can go in, click on the link. I highly recommend checking out the newsletter. Check out Jester. I promise you, it's so much fun. And it's definitely a fun read to go through. Shelley is a blast, and you just got to get into that character to really understand the excitement that you have with this character. Tim, thank you so much for joining. This was a blast. Everyone that was in the chat, all of you are amazing. I really appreciate every last one of you. You went through and made this conversation even better. Thank you so much. All the people that are watching on replay, again, go through and check out Tim's website. It is you'll definitely enjoy yourself over there checking out his works. Everyone, I hope everyone has a fantastic evening and even better week next week. And I'll talk to all of you when I see you again. Until then, stay overbooked. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thanks very much for having me.